Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be discussing the Latin lover, Rudolph Valentino, who is almost more famous for his untimely death than he is for the life that he lived. Rudolph Valentino was born, bear with me here, Rodolfo Alfonso Raffaello Pier Filbert Guglielmi di Valentina di Antangual, I think, on May 6, 1895 in the Italian town of Castellaneta. Oof. Rudolph's father was Italian and his mother was French, so the man that would one day be known as the Latin lover was not Latin at all. He was Italian and French. He had an older brother named Alberto and an older sister named Bais, who had sadly died shortly after she turned 1 year old. Rudolph's parents, Giovanni and Gabriella, didn't get married until they were in their mid-30s, which was quite old for the late 1800s. Giovanni was a veterinarian and Gabriella came from a little bit of money, so the family was highly regarded in their community and was able to live a very comfortable life. Education and academic excellence were of the highest priority for Giovanni and Gabriella for their two sons. Alberto succeeded in making his parents happy in this regard, but Rudolph, not so much. As we hear about so much in the stories of youth of our future performers, little Rudolph was inquisitive, experimentative, imaginative, charismatic, and energetic, which are all adjectives I love as a preschool teacher in today's world. But in prim and proper turn-of-the-century Italian society, those were not descriptions that were desirable for children. He kept his parents on their toes, let's just say that. In 1904, when Rudolph was 9 years old, his family moved to Taranto, which is right on the sea, and it opened up a whole new world of possibilities for the curious child. And guess what else they had? A theater. He loved that. The move did not help Rudolph's academic success, though. He was skipping school almost as much as he was attending, and he did so poorly one year that he had to repeat that year of school. And then an event occurred that would shatter Rudolph's carefree childhood. When he was 11 years old, his father died from malaria. This loss obviously deeply affected the children, and what little focus Rudolph had on his studies before his father's death were now completely gone. Not knowing what else to do, Gabriella made the difficult decision to send Rudolph to boarding school. She sent him to a school that had a very strict and rigorous curriculum focusing on engineering and math, which was just what he needed. He needed structure, and his mind needed to be nurtured in just this way. Things worked out well for a while at the boarding school, but Rudolph put more energy into athletics than academics. With expulsion threatened, Gabriella invited her son back home, not sure what to do with him now. She was very, very worried about his future. Rudolph did graduate, just barely, and then his mother pushed him to figure out what he wanted to do for a career, what he wanted to do for the rest of his life, and how he was going to support himself. She'd really take anything at this point. He wanted to join the Navy, but he was deemed too physically deficient, so he was unable to enlist. Then his mom suggested that he apply to the Agricultural Institute in Genoa, and he was accepted. So off to Genoa he went, ready to embark on his new life on his own. This field seemed to be a good fit for him, and he was able to earn his degree after 2 years of studies. He also became skilled on horseback during this time and became a horse trainer. And he fell in love for the first time with the school cook's daughter. The problem with graduating from college, though, is that you have to get a job, and then you have to go to that job every day for the rest of your life. Well, Rudolph Valentino didn't think that sounded very fun. But he did want to live the lifestyle of someone who had the regular paycheck, and a big paycheck too. He just didn't want to actually earn the paycheck. So, what did Rudolph Valentino do with his shiny new agricultural degree? He became a dance instructor, obviously, but this unfortunately did not pay for the fancy things that he wanted in his life. So, he thought he'd see if America had any shiny opportunities for him. Rudolph Valentino immigrated to the United States in December of 1913 when he was 18 years old. And he learned very quickly that the dreamland of opportunities known as America was not exactly what he had dreamed up in his head. He still had to work for the fancy things he wanted, only now he had to do it in a foreign land, with a foreign language, without knowing a soul. His first means of making money was dancing in the streets of New York City. His home was a park bench in Central Park. It was a harsh-hitting reality. He eventually got a job as a gardener, but that position didn't hold his attention for too long. And then he was a dishwasher. No go with that career path too. He kept falling back on dancing in the streets and taking jobs as a dance instructor when he was able. Traditional working life was just not for him. Aside from teaching the tango, Rudolph also worked at the Maxim nightclub where he was a dance partner for their female patrons. And he had them lining up for miles for a swing around the dance floor with him. And then something happened that could have been an extremely negative, life-altering experience, but somehow miraculously became one of the best things that ever happened to Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph met a wealthy woman named Blanca de Sol, a married wealthy woman. The two began a relationship, and soon after Blanca and her husband, John, began divorce proceedings. Blanca was accusing her husband of infidelity, which she may or may not have been also guilty of, and Rudolph was called to testify in the proceedings about his knowledge of her husband's infidelities. The case was settled, but John de Sol was not happy with Rudolph Valentino. John de Sol was a politically connected man, and it is speculated by many that he used his connections to get revenge on the man who interfered with his marriage and subsequent divorce. Rodolfo Guglielmi, which was still Rudolph Valentini's name at the time, was arrested alongside a woman named Georgiana Tim during a crackdown on blackmailers at brothels. It appears that Rudolph was living with Miss Tim at the time of the arrest. Whatever the exact circumstances that led to the arrest of 20-year-old Rodolfo Guglielmi, this arrest and newspaper coverage was the event that first brought his pretty face and exuberant personality to light in the American public. Tragically, Blanca de Sol fatally shot her ex-husband John in 1917 over a custody dispute for their child. Fearing that he would once again be drug into a court case centered around the de Sols, Rudolph ski-daddled out of New York and headed west, which would be the move that would change his life. Rudolph had found a dance troupe that was performing its way westward, leaving from New York soon, so he danced his way into that troupe. This would be his free ride across the country and out of his messes in New York. He hoped the tour would bring him all the way to California, but the troupe dissolved before getting that far, leaving Rudolph stranded in Utah. Luck struck when he connected with Al Jolson and secured a part in his rendition of Robinson Crusoe that would be performing in LA. So he made it to California, and he was soon making important contacts within the local performing arts industry. One significant contact his networking gained him was that of actor Norman Carey. Carey wasn't necessarily impressed with Rudolph's acting abilities. Remember, he just kind of fell into it, and he had barely acted at this point. But Carey was impressed by his physical appearance. He had the face and body of a star. The two became great friends and became roommates as they worked on excelling their acting careers. Rudolph quickly realized that Los Angeles was a hoppin' place to be as a dance instructor, so he made a decent living doing that and quickly had an impressive clientele of wealthy women. I'm sure his charismatic personality really impressed these women. It seems so, at least, because these women would shower him with gifts and let him borrow their expensive cars. His work as a dance instructor was doing so well, in fact, that he was able to rent his very own apartment on Sunset Boulevard. No more roommate. Soon he was appearing in small parts in silent films, mostly due to his good looks, but most studio execs considered him too dark-skinned to ever reach stardom. There's that little sprinkling of racism again. If being a movie star was what he really wanted, he would have to work like hell to achieve it. The first of these beginning small roles he played was as a dancer in 1917's Alimony, and that was quickly followed by a few others. He often played an exotic villainous character because of his not perfectly white appearance. It wouldn't take long for him to start climbing the stardom ladder. Within a year, he had his first major movie role in the film All Night, which was a romantic comedy with a lot of physical comedy elements to it, a contrast to the films that he would be known for once he achieved full fame. He was staying busy with work, appearing in 9 films in 1919, but all of them were lackluster at best. It was during this time that he shortened his super-duper long birth name to the stage name of Rudolph Valentino. Outside of work, 1919 brought Rudolph Valentino to the altar when he married actress Jean Acker on November 6th of that year. The marriage was born into a cloud of mystery, though. Jean Acker was well known to have relationships with women, so it's speculated that her reason for marrying Rudolph Valentino was not very authentic, but more so a publicity stunt to cover up her true sexuality. On the wedding night, Jean locked Rudolph out of the wedding suite at the Hollywood Hotel, and after repeatedly pounding on the door for a half an hour, he gave up and he went home. The marriage was reportedly never consummated, and Jean Acker immediately returned to her girlfriend. The marriage lasted legally for 3 years, but the two never lived a true married life together. The next woman who had her eyes set on Rudolph Valentino was a woman named June Mathis. But it wasn't in a romantic way. She was a scriptwriter, and she wanted Rudolph for the leading role in the upcoming film, The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Studio execs, again, were not thrilled about a man with such a, quote, exotic appearance holding a leading male part, but June convinced them to give him a shot. And shocker, it turned out viewers didn't mind one bit that his skin was a tone or two darker than other leading men. In fact, this exotic look, as they called it, along with his dancing skills that he was able to use in the film, made people flock to the theaters even more. The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse was released in 1921, and 26-year-old Rudolph Valentino was now a movie star. Women especially took great notice of this new unique star on the silver screen. He was beautiful, not the more ruggedly handsome type of men that they were used to seeing. He had a more delicate and sensual look to him, while remaining extremely sexually appealing to women. And I'm sure many men too, they just weren't able to talk about it. With this one film, Rudolph Valentino had infiltrated American culture. Women were going crazy. They were encouraging their husbands to pomade their hair and learn the tango. His sexual appeal sent women into a frenzy, and they wanted more of the Latin lover, who wasn't Latin at all, but they didn't care. Even with the success of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, execs at Metro Studio were convinced it would be a one-hit wonder for Rudolph Valentino. So when he asked for a raise, they refused. He was still making decent money, $350 per week, which would be about $6,100 a week today. But he knew he deserved more. He knew what the studios were making off of his success. He would sadly be a victim to the harshness of studio control for the rest of his short life. Luckily, he had a strong ally in June Mathis, and she was able to use her power to get him into more leading roles since the studio execs didn't really want to showcase him anymore. But it was clear that Metro Studio was not prioritizing the career of Rudolph Valentino, so he left, and June Mathis went with him. He signed under contract with famous Players Lasky Studio later in 1921 and soon starred in the movie The Sheik, which would go on to be one of his most famous pieces of work. The film hit box office records. It was a hugely successful movie. The studio move proved to be a very good decision for him. Let's dip back into Rudolph Valentino's personal life. Remember that wife he has? Yep, she's still his wife. Although they never lived a traditional life as husband and wife, he and Jean Acker were still legally married during all of this climb to fame that he was doing. Well, also during that time, he fell in love. Her name was Natasha Rambova, and she was a costume designer. They met on the set of 1921's Uncharted Seas, fell in love, and the relationship was getting pretty serious within several months. So serious that Rudolph wanted to marry Natasha. So he figured now would be a good time to get that divorce from Jean Acker. They just really had never had a reason to end their marriage until now. After the divorce was final in 1922, the two lovebirds got married. But whoopsies, he didn't wait the required 1-year waiting period that's required by California law between marriages. So he was charged with bigamy and spent a few days in jail. He did not have a very good track record with those wedding nights. Rudolph and Natasha were forced to impatiently wait out the required waiting period in order to avoid prosecution, and they were finally able to be legally married on March 14, 1923. Now, I did not read too many positive accounts of Natasha Rambova. She was described as controlling and difficult. She was banned from the sets her new husband was working on because of the disruptions that she caused, and he had to sacrifice many friendships and business relationships due to the difficulty that she brought into his life. One of these relationships that was lost was with June Mathis, the woman who was largely responsible for his success, the woman who always had his back. But whatever was going on in this marriage, it was enough to cause June to walk away. With his personal life taking some negative turns, he also wasn't completely satisfied with his treatment at famous Players Lasky studio. He was now bringing in an impressive $1,250 a week, which adjusts to about $23,000 a week or $1.2 million a year. Hey, I'd be happy with that. But it was still much lower than what other leading men were bringing in. I'm sure this had a little sprinkling of racism to blame too. Rudolph Valentino went on strike in September of 1922 when the studio refused to give him a raise. Well, it worked. They offered him a whopping $7,000 a week, which he accepted and negotiated the freedom to work for other companies in addition. But they had to be non-film related companies. Wanting to dip his toes in ventures outside of Hollywood films, Valentino returned to dancing and he appeared as a judge in a few beauty contests. Something he thought would be kind of fun, but he realized acting in films was the place that he really wanted to be. Superstars Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and Mary Pickford had founded their own studio in 1919 called United Artists Studio. And in 1925, they asked Rudolph Valentino to sign a contract with their studio, offering him $10,000 per week, plus a percentage of profits from each of the 3 films per year that he would be contracted to star in. Yes, please. Well, he thought so too. This was a fantastic opportunity for him. This move marked a new beginning for Rudolph Valentino. And with that new beginning came the end to his marriage with Natasha Rambova. The marriage ended in divorce at the end of 1925. Rudolph had success with his films under his new contract with United Artists. He remained popular amongst the ladies, but men had been increasingly questioning his sexuality, mostly because of his appearance and image. He was called a, quote, pink powder puff. It should be noted that the Rudolph Valentino people were accustomed to seeing on screen was usually adorned with heavy makeup and elaborate costumes. Either way, his look shouldn't have anything to do with his sexuality. Men who copied his look were considered feminine, and men who slicked their hair back with pomade like him were being called Vaselinos. The more successful Rudolph Valentino became, the more jokes about him were being made in the public. And these jokes did not sit well with Rudolph Valentino. All of the editorial write-ups questioning his sexuality and masculinity came to a breaking point for him. And he challenged New York Evening Journal writer Frank O'Neill to a public boxing match, a Macho Man standoff. Well, little did anyone know, but Rudolph Valentino was no stranger to the boxing ring. He had been a boxer at the boarding school he attended, and he really excelled at the sport. Leading up to the match, he trained under heavyweight champ Jack Dempsey. He showed up for the match on the roof of the Ambassador Hotel in New York City ready to win. And win he did. In early 1926, Rudolph attended one of the famous costume parties thrown by William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies at the Hearst Castle. Oh, I wish I could tell you what his costume was, but I don't know. But while he was at this party, he met a beautiful actress named Pola Negri, and the two hit it off and immediately began dating. Later in 1926, Rudolph starred in the sequel to The Sheik, The Son of the Sheik. The movie was very popular among audiences. But this could have been because Rudolph Valentino was dead by the time it opened in theaters. He had collapsed at his New York hotel on August 15, 1926, and he was rushed to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed him with appendicitis and gastric ulcers. Nothing too life-threatening, something they would be able to fix up and get him on his way in no time. The surgery was performed, and he began his recovery in the hospital. But instead of healing, his compromised body developed an infection and peritonitis. Something that could be treated rather easily today, but the treatment options just weren't available yet in his time. By August 23rd, 8 days after he first entered the hospital, doctors knew there was nothing they could do to save him and that he was dying. The infection was taking over. But they didn't tell him that. He never knew. Rudolph Valentino slipped into unconsciousness, having been optimistically making plans for his future once he was healed, and he would never again open his eyes. He died that afternoon on August 23, 1926. He was only 31 years old. The news of his death was an intense shock to the world. News had broke that he'd been hospitalized with an appendicitis, but no one imagined that anything other than a little recovery time would be all that his future would hold. With the news of his death, a riot broke out in the streets of New York City, requiring over 100 mounted NYPD officers to control the situation. There were even reports of women dying by suicide after the news of Rudolph Valentino's shocking death. Rudolph Valentino's body lay in state for 1 week before his funeral in New York City. More riots occurred as mourners tried to get a glimpse of his body. Thousands upon thousands of fans showed up to pay tribute. The line to see him continuously stretched at least 11 blocks long. His funeral was held on August 30th, 1926, and 80,000 mourners showed up for it. A few of the most notable mourners were Gloria Swanson, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks. The newest love of his life, Pola Negri, seemed to have made the whole day all about her as she fainted several times in front of photographers, including at his coffin, where she also had displayed a ginormous flower arrangement that spelled out her name. Yikes. Side note, why don't people faint anymore? A second funeral was held in Hollywood, where Rudolph Valentino would be laid to rest. His old friend, the one who always had his back, showed up for him when it mattered the most to show that she had never stopped loving and respecting him. June Mathis. She provided the crypt that he is laid to rest in at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey said of his friend, quote, "He was the most virile and masculine of men. The women were like flies to a honeypot. He could never shake them off anywhere he went. What a lovely, lucky guy," end quote. Although almost every other man in the world considered Rudolph Valentino a very lucky man for his success both in his career and being the want of women everywhere, Rudolph Valentino himself felt like he was living a lie. He wasn't very happy. He was rich in material possessions, but he generally felt very poor in happiness. Something we hear of all too often in our stories. But he seemed very optimistic about his future with United Artists, and it's a tragedy that he wasn't able to find that happiness that was very likely within reach for him. He died so heartbreakingly young, with so much life and hope and promise ahead of him. Now I would like to share some other interesting facts I learned about Rudolph Valentino during my research. Bullet point number 1. For many years after his death, a mysterious woman in black would visit his tomb on the anniversary of his death and leave a single red rose. The mystery woman was later claimed to be a woman named Princess Wilson, or Dietra Flame, which was her stage name. I'm not sure what kind of stage. But she was not an obsessed fan or former lover. She was just a girl when she met Rudolph Valentino, when she was deathly ill and hospitalized at the age of 14. He came to visit her and gave her a single red rose in her hospital bed. So she honored him by doing the same thing every year for 30 years after his death. Bullet point number 2. As I said, scriptwriter and friend June Mathis provided the crypt that Rudolph Valentino was interred in. Well, the story I read was that however successful he was, he always had that very, very expensive, lavish taste, and he was in some pretty severe debt when he died, so his estate couldn't cover the cost of his burial. June Mathis loaned her chamber in her family crypt to him until he was able to be moved to a permanent final resting place after the funds were secured. Well, June Mathis ended up dying less than a year later, so Rudolph Valentino's body was moved over to June's husband's chamber in the crypt, so she could be interred in her own spot. And Rudolph Valentino remains there today, next to his friend June. Which is really lovely, but what about June's poor husband? Hopefully they were able to squeeze him in somewhere nearby. Bullet point number 3. Rudolph Valentino spoke at least 4 languages fluently: Italian, French, Spanish, and English. That's 3 more than me. Bullet point number 4. This one's fun. Chic condoms rolled out onto the market in the 1930s, and Rudolph Valentino's silhouette was used on their packaging for years. The company's name was actually derived from the movie The Chic. So Rudolph Valentino was the poster child for condoms. What a legacy. I looked this up online to check it out, and I was surprised to learn that there is a shocking amount of 100-year-old condoms for sale online. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I spent at least 10 minutes going down a rabbit hole of vintage condoms. Time well spent. Although I'm probably going to start seeing a lot of ads for condoms in my algorithm now. In conclusion, Rudolph Valentino was born as a soul that craved a life outside the box. Academics weren't for him. Working 9 to 5 every day for the rest of his life wasn't for him. Monotony of life wasn't for him. A poor or middle-class lifestyle wasn't for him. He wanted adventure, variety, respect, and a bankroll that could afford him all of the lavish objects of his dreams. Rudolph Valentino was one of the world's first true heartthrobs. He took America by storm with his unique look and his sensual style. Who knows what kind of greatness he could have achieved in the next chapter of his life? Unfortunately, the world was never given the chance to find out. Rudolph Valentino's legacy lies more in his death than his life. His image was admired more than his actual work, and this bothered him. He wanted to prove himself as an esteemed actor, and he was on the path to do just that. It's a tragedy that he was taken so young. Thank you, Rudolph Valentino, for giving yourself to the world through your work and for enduring both the ridicule of your critics and the hysterical admiration of your female fans. Thank you for being strong against the racism you encountered while trying to build your career and be compensated fairly for your work. People like you paved the way for so many that came after you. And thank you all for listening. Please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you like what you hear, please take a second to give a 5-star rating where you listen to your podcasts and a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you listen there. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some sweet bonus content as a thank you, Head on over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to see what options are available there. If you already are a Patreon member, I want to share that the November movie of the month is 1944's The Very Thought of You, which is available to watch for free on YouTube. Not a patron and want to know what this is all about? Go to Patreon and check out the fun bonus perks that you could have too. I appreciate each and every one of you so much for taking the time to listen to my stories. For this episode, I used a book titled Legends of Hollywood: The Life of Rudolph Valentino by the Charles River Editors, Britannica.com, History.com, a blog dedicated to the life of Rudolph Valentino called His Flame Still Lives, a Guinness World Records article by Sanj Atwal from January 23, 2024, and the center of my universe, IMDB.